Hello and welcome to Scouting for Growth. I'm Sabine VdL, and today we are diving into a topic that is top of mind for many in insurance finance: data reconciliation for the CFO. We know that insurance CFOs face intense pressure to deliver fast and accurate financial results, yet often struggle with data scattered across policy claims and other systems. These can turn monthly closes and reporting into a tedious, error-prone process. In a world where agility and precision are paramount, how can CFOs turn this data chaos into strategic clarity? That is what we are here to explore. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Yandy Plasencia, the CEO of and founder of DataHaven Software. Yandy is a seasoned product and technology leader who has built a cutting-edge insurance platform or insurtech platform, pioneering an intelligent layer for insurance data. He has a strong startup background and deep expertise in insurance and finance technology as well, making him a leading voice on how to modernize insurance operations through data and artificial intelligence. In today's conversation, we will talk about Yandy's journey and vision, and also unpack how mid-sized insurance companies can explore and empower their finance teams, and especially their CFOs, by automating data reconciliation and unlocking real-time insights. The discussion will be conversational, visionary, and strategic. So grab a coffee, sit back, and let's explore how insurance CFOs can focus on insight, not cleanup, in the era of intelligent, data-driven finance. Welcome, Yandy.
Hi, Sabine. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
Um,
welcome.
yeah, definitely. It's data is it's a powerful tool, and it's make it or break it for a lot of companies, especially insurance. Risk is the when people say the devil's in the details, it really is for insurance. All the details are in the data, so it's critical to have real good control over it and having a really good understanding of what's happening in the business. So just to give you a little bit of background, so I'm an accountant. I
Oh,
come from
wow,
an
an
accounting
accountant.
background. Yeah. um, that's where I started my education for the most part. um, and I spent a lot of time in other industries before I stumbled upon insurance, and having looked back since. um, and I've done nothing but dive deeper into more and more insurance problems. Everything is always around the same topic. It's always about the data and how these core, really, really expensive, valuable systems reflect to the in the P&L at the end of the day. How they're really, that's your true measure of performance, and that's where I've spent a lot of time in the past, and now that's where I'm entirely focused on solving this problem for insurance. And I think it affects everybody in the entire insurance value chain, all the way from MGAs, MGUs, brokers, agents, and most importantly, carriers, including even the holding companies that own the carriers.
Yes, absolutely. So how long have you been solving that problem for? I mean, when we met a few weeks ago in Ohio, Yandy, you were talking to a number of carriers, large and small. And I was wondering to myself, how long have you been focusing on solving that data problem? And now, I mean, we are going to dive into how you are using artificial intelligence, but data for the corporations using your accounting background, how long have you been solving that problem for?
So I started just on insurance in 2016, and that's all I've done since. I haven't done anything else other than every data problem that you can think of related to insurance. And that's underwriting, claims, billing, how it affects how it's all reflected in the P&L, compliance, how are all of the numbers and how all of that is really represented for workers' comp from an indemnity perspective, how medical expenses and medical billing affects rating, and I mean it's basically the entire value chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of challenges to address the data reconciliation problem we are seeing in our industry. And I read recently, by doing some research, to actually have this conversation with you, Yandy, is that, CFOs today often are grappling with fragmented data sources and labor intensive reconciliation. So a big problem not affected just the small insurers, but as well the big ones. Probably when they have to do the reporting, and they have to do regular reporting to the regulators, but also to the financial institutions that are governing us, right? In US, I guess it will be the IRS. In the UK, will be HMRC. In your experience, what are the biggest data management challenges and reconciliation challenges as well facing the CFO today of mid-sized companies as much as big companies?
Yeah, I mean, the problem varies. It depends on who you ask specifically, because I mean, insurance is all the same, but every company does things differently. Yes, there's a lot of regulation for workers' comp, and it normalizes how things should be done. That only varies by that's only really structured by each state, because a lot of the rules are also, they have their own variations state by state, because workers' compensation laws and rules they vary by state. So, but for the most part, the challenge, it boils down to the basic uh, ledger subledger challenge, because you have core systems, which are your transactional systems, and they have all of your information of what took place, where payments went out, when, where, when a claim came in, what defined that claim, what took place. And all of that information is used to then verify that the claim has coverage by looking at the policy, the rules defined within the policy, and then that all that information, which by the way, it's all in separate systems, determines if a claimant has coverage, and then from there, a payment or a benefit may be issued. If it may require further authorization, that has to take place as well. And all these things are taking place, but none of that is reflected on on either the balance sheet or the P&L, the profit and loss statement or the income statement. So there's all these activities that take place every single day in an insurance carrier, and none of that is ever reflected in the financial statements. But at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, and at the end of every year, accounting and finance teams have to scramble all this data to figure out, okay, we made all these payments. Does this tie down to our bank balance at the end of the week, month, quarter, year? That reconciliation process is exhaustive. It takes a lot of time, and it has to be accurate to the penny. And just because it's accurate doesn't mean it was valid. And that's where the data itself can actually then prompt you to further like investigation and fraud cases and so on, and many other different avenues, right? But it all starts with the data. So if you have the data in these systems and it's not so easy to extract it out in a way that it's ingestible and consumable by the right audience, then it's quite challenging for that audience to interpret the data and reconcile it and do it all timely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. And that is where I think I want to bring on next, my next question. So timeliness is important. And you actually highlighted that you're actually dealing with a lot of different data sources. You have to reconcile this literally to the penny, right? To be actually accurate all the time, right? So when you start looking at the CFO, right, and these controllers, all those people are continuously under pressure to deliver faster, better, accurate financial reporting, even when the data complexity increases, and it's not getting lesser right now, is increasing with the complexity of the risk we are underwriting, with the complexity of the emerging risk coming to us, with the complexity of even the system we are using, right? And a lot of carriers are using old system and probably need to move to new systems. So why is this timely, reliable data reconciliation so critical for those companies to ensure health, agility, flexibility, fulfilling the customer need maybe as well? And what are the
Yeah.
risks if these reconciliation processes are done poorly or too slowly today?
So think about it this way. If you have a credit card, right? Let's say the credit card bears the risk of fronting you X amount of dollars to, because we have a mutual agreement. Let's say I'm a credit card company, you are the credit card holder, and I give you X amount of dollars to be able to spend. And let's just assume that you want to know not only your credit balance is used accordingly, right? But that you are the one who actually made those expenses, and that there's no fraud in place, and that everything is in fact running smoothly, your identity is protected and everything, right? Imagine if there were fraudulent activities, or just even something that took place even by mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say a vendor swiped the card by mistake twice, right? Hypothetically. So if you didn't get a notification from your credit card company that that transaction took place, then you would not know until the end of the month, unless you were constantly looking at your account online. It's no different for insurance companies. Imagine every CFO that can only know what took place at the very end of the month, because it's a very exhaustive process to figure out like where their performance is, even on a monthly basis. It's no different. The same thing that if you want to track your performance, managing your credit card, for example, is a relevant example to help you understand if you don't have visibility as to what is actually taking place in your accounts, in your financial position. A surprise at the end of the month is not good for anybody.
No.
And they're constantly in the same situation where it takes a really long time to crunch down all the numbers, because all of these systems, they don't talk. So accounting, which is the general ledger, never talks to the core systems. They really don't. I mean, they may send a payment, right? They may print a check, and it's then reflected the uh, in the book in the bank. But at the end of the day, that has to get reconciled to make sure that the bank actually cashed that check, and whether it's outstanding or not. But all of that information needs to also match to the financial statements. And there's quite an extensive process that goes into the day to day of every accountant and financial analyst to verify all of these numbers, just so the CFO can say, yes, I trust these numbers. And we did our loss ratios went either up or down by 20%. Hopefully not. But it's for the most part, it's always reactive. It's never proactive.
Yeah, and I think as we look at the world we are moving into, right, we often talk about proactive versus reactive, static versus dynamic. And because we are moving to a far more dynamic world, we need that data to be far more accurate all the time. Now, I understand that the role of the CFO has expanded, right? Because of what you are saying, from static to dynamic, right? From traditional finance and stewardship to strategic catalyst for growth. So a CFO is as much the strategist as the chief strategy officer nowadays, and has to look at how one look at delivering growth for the business, which demands a lot of accuracy, a lot of real-time data, a lot of constant decision making. And so, how do we ensure that we have the right data quality? How do we ensure that we have that consistency and reduce delayed data access, which often hinder the CFO in his or her everyday work as a strategic partner to the business, but also to the CEO?
Well, it's really creating a layer where the information that is being reported on the general ledger, on every single entry in the books, they have a traceable way back to the system of record, back to the transactional system. And just by being able to pick a number, let's say expense A, and has $1 million, right? You click on that, and you can trace that back to the root system, and gives you the full transactional detail for that specific number, that's the most reliable way to do something. For the most part, these systems, because they're not connected, you're looking, when you look at a business intelligence dashboard, that's usually connected to some sort of data warehouse that has this information, but there's an exhaustive process that goes in the back office of IT teams or data teams putting this together. And the main disconnect is that your technology folks are not usually data, at least for the smaller size carriers, you're going to have more technical folks that are not necessarily business folks, and there's always a gap between what the business is looking for and what technology folks are looking for. And although technology does a very good job in getting the data where it needs to go, it doesn't always meet the needs of the finance and accounting folks. And there's this ongoing friction between both departments because one is adding more workload to the other, and then the other department is saying, okay, I've asked you for this, I want this, I need, and then the how many times this information is constantly being asked, it continues to grow and compound. And even as of today, the IT departments and the data departments at most carriers, they're overwhelmed. They have peak bottlenecks in terms of like the data requests that are ongoing. And many times there's a field missing or something that was not originally gathered in the initial requirements gathering for the request from the business user. And that's where there's always a disconnect. But in order to do this correctly, it's building really an intelligence layer where you have really a well-defined relationships across every single data point as it pertains to financials. If it affects financials, you need to have some sort of relationship or an ontology or something that means that tells you how these data points are interrelated. And if you don't have that, it's only creating a problem for something else that's going to come up very soon.
Yeah. So you actually already highlighted one of the big problems, right? Many, mid-size insurers, large insurers still rely on spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets and custom in-house tools, to actually quick fix, right? To actually patch things around just to get the job done quickly. From your point of view, Yandy, how do these stopgap solutions actually help? And do they help actually? Or do they create a bigger problem for most organizations in the long run? For example, building in-house reconciliation tools and, even though they can be cost effective, do they create a problem for the organization long term? I know that helps non-technical users like myself. However, what are the implications for the organization long term? So, what are the pitfalls you see happening when we start using those DIY approaches to perform data reconciliation in finance?
I've seen it all the way from Excel to Microsoft Access to um, literally static CSV files that are then pulling data from other. They basically have data extracts and then Excel files that then pull it into Power BI tools to then visualize it. The main issue that you run into there is that those tools they solve the problem short term until they don't. They are extremely helpful until they become painful, and they become a bottleneck for the organization to grow eventually. Not at first. At first, when they're first created, they're very helpful, and that's the tool that is at their fingertips, and they can solve the short term problem. But as the problem, as the data sets get larger, and as the organization grows, and as the complexities also grow, those tools also don't have change controls in place. Uh, they also become a, a personnel risk because then only one or two people in the entire company understand it, and then no one else does because they're the ones who built it. That becomes a separate challenge altogether for the organization. And then supporting it is another barrier. Now, think about it this way. So, what about organizations that go into mergers and acquisitions, and that now becomes a scope item of potential um, deal breaker for the deal for the acquisition? I mean, situations like that happen all the time. I've heard personally from some sizable carriers who have X systems that I won't mention, and they don't touch it post acquisition because it works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that.
So
So,
billions of dollars are invested in an acquisition,
yeah.
and then they can't even touch the systems because they don't want it to break because nobody else can support it.
But you see that all the time, right? I mean, we see that with core system today within insurance organizations where, systems have been built, over the years, 30, 40, 50 years. And then a lot of those companies are growing through merger and acquisition, so acquiring new legacy systems. So I think we are seeing that all the time. So, I mean, I guess let's move into talking about how we start leveraging technology to solve that reconciliation problem, right? Because when we talked in the past, right, modern technology such as data platform, intelligent data platforms, and artificial intelligence help solve data reconciliation challenges. And we discussed that in the past. Today, we hear that AI is supposed to drive huge efficiency, benefit, and insight within the finance function, amongst other. But often we don't talk about finance. So I'm really excited to talk about finance because I think it is one of the departments which can take so much advantage of artificial intelligence, as long as we have well structured and connected data. And I think it's very important that the data needs to be in the right place, in the right format to actually leverage that advantage. So what is your take, Yandy, on leveraging automation and artificial intelligence for reconciliation and reporting within the finance function of insurance organization? And what groundwork needs to be done for it to be successful?
Well, for the most part, I mean, if it's in an Excel file and somebody uses that consistently, that means there is some structure to it. That means there is some logic and some sort of definition around how that data got there, um, that they're able to solve the problem with a static, somewhat static file. And that basically means, okay, so if you have the logic and the definitions that you're able to solve this problem and put it by putting it in Excel, putting in some functions and then solving it, right? It's no different in today's current data stack. You can write the same exact transformations. You can leverage them with artificial intelligence to basically automate 90% of the transformations, so ETL work or the data science operations works, of getting the data from point A to point B, and then um, modifying the data so that it makes sense for the business to consume. So, for example, we do the same thing ourselves. I mean, I leverage artificial intelligence to help us simplify how do we define the data structures so that it's aligned with the value that we bring to our customers. For example, property and liability, and it's a slightly different data model than you would look at for a workers' compensation data model, because fundamentally they have different ways to look at the information. Yes, the exposures are what's the underlying risk, but they have fundamentally different meanings. So they have to be structured different. And traditionally, doing this manually would take a very long time just to go through the like data structure discovery, figuring out what every single data point means, and going through every single thing, and to in order for it to define the business value out of every single data point, especially when the data structures vary across different core systems. It's actually now leveraging technology. We not only put together an ontology that has these definitions of what they mean for the insurance company. So, for example, what does a claim mean? What is exposure? Like, what is an actual classification for each different line of coverage? Like, those things have a very specific meaning. When you define that and then you blend it with artificial intelligence to define your transformation models, then you get to build not just a transformation model, but a semantic model that helps you not just be able to leverage AI for building the right layer of information in the data warehouse, but also add some semantic meaning to it so that whenever you want to talk to the data, it's not something that now you have to translate to IT. The system itself can do that.
Yeah, intelligence layers, right? We are starting talking about how we start structuring data and system to not just be digital, We are trying to make them intelligence, and that was one of the core terminology you used when we talked about it, Yandy. How we start doing intelligent data platform, how we start building intelligent data platforms within the CFO office, and ensuring that intelligent layers allows the organization to process data across policy, claims, financial information in a unified manner. So, what does that mean when we start looking at data in such a way for the CFO, Yandy?
So think about it this way: the CFO looks at it from the financial ledger. So if you get a balance sheet, if you get a profit and income statement, you at the very top you have your earnings, right, and then you have your all different losses, so loss adjustment expenses, underwriting expenses, all of the different components that are your costs, right? But every single one of those items, they do translate to something. They come from somewhere. It's not a number that is just made up. That number came from a subsystem. Well, because somebody actually extracted that data and ran the math and basically said, okay, this equals to this much. If that process was done manually, that means in our brain, right, like our physical human brain, we made a connection between one point and another. It's no different creating a neural network that does the same exact thing. So what it means is that you take the information from your subsystems, your core systems, you take all those transactions, you define what every single one of those data points mean, which are typically defined in a database schema, right? And those databases, the same exact way that you have those database relationships, you define the ontologies that helps you define how every single entity, so every data that has some definition connects to the other. Mm-hmm. And when you do the same exact thing between the general ledger, which is what's in your financial statements, and you map it out to your subsystems, you have a traceable way to create relationships across the data. And then when you add on top of that a layer of information that basically metadata, so the definition of what this information means, what a claim is, what a payment means, what is a collection, what is a subrogation activity, what every single terminology that is specific to that transaction is embedded into the overall data architecture, you have an intelligent layer that you can later on connect to any AI system and extract meaningful information, not just by having to write code, but just by talking to the system.
Critical ability to talk to the system with the right information. One thing which came to mind as you were speaking, Yandy, is when we start looking at conversation we just had a few moments ago, which is insurance businesses are built on legacy infrastructure, legacy system. So when we start looking at your scenario, right, upgrading, do they need to upgrade their data infrastructure? That usually is very costly to replace core system. How is it, or whether is it possible to modernize this financial operation without ripping out systems, and do this in such a way we can have access to the data that we need to actually access to make the right decision, but also to make sure we do the right reconciliation and the right reporting. So how can companies leverage these new integration approaches to do the right thing with their data?
So for smaller carriers, it's costly, and that's where there's a lot of opportunities to do it in a leveraged way that doesn't cost as much as it would traditionally. If you were to do the same, all of the activities required to have everything in place yourself, it's quite expensive. Just the human capital alone, it adds up. But the way that you do this is basically extracting just the information. All of this, even if it's a legacy system, it's either in a mainframe or in a database that has this information. There are many ways that you can extract the information from the system without affecting the system at all. Just taking daily extracts of the data. Depending on the capabilities, you can basically do daily extraction of all the information that you need, upload it into a data lakehouse, and then from there you start building the information, the structures that are necessary. It's only labor intensive if you try to do this completely manually and you don't leverage artificial intelligence in the right ways. And if you don't have a real well-defined framework to do this. If you do, it's actually much easier to do. We do this every single day. It's pretty easy, but it boils down to having the right framework, having the right structure, having the right tech stack, and just leveraging it in the right way. And it doesn't have to be as costly. You don't have to replace any existing systems at all.
That's the question I was going to ask you. I mean, do you need to replace the system? Because, when you think about modern data solution and all the things we are reading out there, right? You have to integrate legacy system to provide this unified single view of the data. And often you hear about replacement, and a lot of organizations do not want to do the rip and replace. So, what's your view around this, using this integration focused tools to be able to drive that single view of the truth without to do that rip and replace? What you are saying, it's possible. You have done it.
Yeah, it's possible. It's not. I mean, it's not it's not rocket science. It's just data science, but it's pretty straightforward, really. The challenge point comes down to replacing systems. It's if you actually do want to change and implement controls in these old legacies. That's an entirely different conversation. But if you, for example, if your legacy system is lacking controls and it is creating many other problems because of human error entries, just lacking controls all over the place, and then it becomes a liability for the organization, that conversation is then more palatable, because at that point, I mean, it is becoming a liability rather than an asset that's really producing. But you don't really have to replace a system that is fully functional, even if it's a legacy system, because that data can always be extracted, put in the right ecosystem that supports massively parallel processing, which basically means you can run billions of queries on it, and it runs really fast.
So, looking at what you've done, you have been working on this for, you said, since 2016, right? Nearly 9 years, right? Nearly 10 years. So tell us, what is the best approach to actually make sure that we are doing that data reconciliation and accessing one single view of the truth in the right way when we start thinking about the chief finance officer of, let's say, a mid-sized insurance company?
It depends on what you value most. If you value time, then if you value time, that means, do you want your people spending time collecting the data and compiling the data, or do you want your folks really spending time analyzing and extracting real value because the data is already monetized, right? You don't want to, in my opinion, I think the best, most important thing is having a real good understanding of the questions that you want to ask, having a really good understanding of how the business is performing, or what information it is that you need to understand that. And if you do have that, then it's very easy to put together in place an ontology and a structure and an architecture that makes sense, that is tightly aligned with the intelligence that you're trying to extract. If you don't have those questions in place, it's very challenging. For anyone to do to create an intelligence layer, because you don't even know what to ask for, right? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they do know what they're looking for. It just takes a lot of time to put it together, historically.
Yeah. So let's talk about results, Yandy. What tangible benefits can a CFO expect to achieve, right, by investing into one single view data reconciliation platform, automation tools, all the capabilities your team and yourself have put together and have been delivering successfully within the industry?
I can tell you that I will guarantee at least 2,000 hours of human hours spent saved per year. That's how good we our capabilities in terms of delivering value for what we do. I mean, our intelligence layer will save you at least 2,000 hours a year of human per person that they won't have to spend in data wrangling, doing any sort of data activities per person.
And based on your experience, have you seen, similar, let's be neutral and agnostic, have you seen this type of result being actually achieved within our industry, Have you seen similar outcomes being achieved by others in the industry, either by doing it themselves, right? It's not always about using external resources. Sometimes organizations are doing that internally, using their own competencies and own capabilities. Tell us, what have you seen being realized within the CFO office across the world?
The best candidate to know exactly this, and they've seen it firsthand, and this is what they do every single day, are big consulting firms, McKinsey, and others. They know exactly what I'm talking about, and they do this every single day. But it is in their model. I mean, this is what they do. They solve this fundamental problem as a consulting capacity, and that's a pretty sizable chunk of most business models for consulting companies that do this similar work, because it is quite complex, and it is manual intensive, and they threw a lot of people. Generally speaking, you do assign a lot of people in the past to do this, but if you put together an intelligence layer, you don't need that many people to do the similar work. You get to spend less time putting together the data, collecting the Excel files, and creating the connections between Excel files, and then you do this in a reusable, repeatable way where you have a system that is actually has all this data put together in the right ecosystem. And it could be done if you're really large and you have the budget for it. Insurance companies are doing this. Large insurance companies are doing it, but it's such a complex problem that that's all they do. Their data teams are overwhelmed as it is, and many times they don't even touch those legacy systems. They just, as long as it works and as long as we can extract the data, we're good. But then there's another challenge in massaging the data. But for the most part, it's not always reconcilable to the CFO office, and that's exactly why that's our key focus.
You're focusing on. And so, I mean, interestingly enough, you said it's, when you start looking at those intelligent data layers, this is happening every single day in large enterprises as well as mid-sized and small enterprises, but it's not always focused on the chief finance officer. And I think it's very important that we are actually focusing on a very specific role here. Now, time-wise, what would be a range, if one would want to go through this type of initiatives? Does that take 3 months? Does that take 3 years? What is a timeline we could actually expect to actually start leveraging structured data to actually make better decision in finance?
I get some people don't believe when I say this, but I truly believe in this, and this is really to my core, and this is all we do. So we have always been. It's our goal and our sole existence to prove to our customer that we can show value in 30 days. And how we do that is we basically focus on one department, CFO office, accounting and finance. And we say, okay, so we have these data points, right? Which are, you already know them, you already do them manually, but you do this process. We can map out all this data and get you the same exact number, repeatable without you ever having to do that manually again in less than 30 days. It's pretty straightforward. Now, if you're talking about an organization that has like 100 different systems, that timeline is not realistic. But 80% of carriers do not have 20,000 systems. They have 3, 4, maybe 5. They have all of the core information, right? Those carriers, we can definitely do this 30, 90 days tops. And it's realistic because all you have to worry about is getting the structures and the connections in place. Everything else, we've done this before. We know this really well. It's in our core. So it's not like we have to figure out much. Now, if you have a completely new system or a system that nobody has ever, you're doing some sort of novel insurance practice that nobody has ever seen, then that is a completely different conversation. But for the most part, workers' comp and most property and casualty, we understand that really well. So it's not unrealistic. It's not extreme to say 30 days because, again, we're not talking about reconciling every single component of the system. We start with one, and from there we expand significantly into other ones.
Fascinating.
Other different metrics.
Yeah, and other different metrics. So I mean, it's great to hear 30 days. You can actually start delivering value, right? Which for me means it's now OPEX type projects within 30 days. So let's look into the future of insurance and the role of the CFO, actually, Yandy, because as we started our discussion, we said that the CFO is moving to a role where he or she is becoming a catalyst for growth. And so when we actually start looking at the role of the CFO in the next 5 to 10 years, what do you envision that role to be, Yandy? Partly when we start looking at data and analytics at the central stage of their role.
I've always been everywhere I've worked has always been with the CFOs and controllers, and for the most part, they have always been they have no choice but to be really data driven, and I think it's only going to get amplified because of the growing dependency on artificial intelligence to leverage time in exponential ways. And I think the CFO office eventually will become the core business intelligence operations of the of insurance companies that defines how agile the organization is to be able to take on more risk. The risk-based capital restrictions that are well defined within compliance requirements,
Mm-hmm.
that's within the CFO's bread and butter. That's really like, if they're not compliant, that's because the CFO overlooked something, and then that then definitely affects the CEO. So I mean, it is. I only see the CFO office expanding into more of an intelligence mixed with financials of overall core operations.
100%. And that takes me to, the fact that the CFO become, I guess, the partner, the strategic partner of the CEO, right? As the role evolves, that role becomes such a strategic role. So what will, for you, distinguish the most successful CFOs of tomorrow when we think about the age we are entering, which is an age of artificial intelligence and big data?
I think a CFO that understands the value of leveraging resources necessary to bring in, to get the most amount of return on capital, and it doesn't need to be, capex. It could definitely be like enhancing operating activities every single day by having the right resources so that you can have real fast agility when it comes down to knowing how like what's taking place at at the lowest level possible in the transactions. And many times you don't have visibility over that.
Hmm.
But fundamentally, whenever something really big happened anywhere, it started somewhere, and you got to trace it back down to what was the root cause. And that root cause is always in the transactions. There was something, always a needle in that haystack that you can find, and when you find it, that you figured out where all the problems were, what triggered all the subsequent problems. The CFO that puts together has the right resources in place and understands that if you're an insurance company, you're not a software company. Don't try to build it yourself. It's not always a build it yourself solution. Many times you can have the right partners in your stack, and if you have the right partners that are quick, they deliver on what they say, and they're constantly keeping you up to speed with the latest and greatest tech, then you're likely going to thrive and beat everybody else.
Building a data driven financial function, right, requires today for those CFOs to partner with others. And I assume, when I start looking at operating models and organizational chart, chief data officer, IT leaders are key partners, right, in that unified data strategy for finance. So, what do you think are the practical steps a CFO, right, a leader of finance, needs to take to start moving the needle within the organization to address, the governance issue, automation issue, insight integration issue, among others?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really good point. So if we think about the broader picture, right, of insurance operations, there are a lot of different systems. Um, you have pharmacy systems, you have medical systems, you have a lot of different data. You have asset management, valuation management, you have many different systems all scattered throughout the place. And that's really the role of the chief data officer to manage. And their sole responsibility is really that data governance and making sure that you do have visibility over all of this data. But that's a one entirely different view of looking at information. Finance only looks at what really is affecting the performance of the company and the financial compliance requirements, and can you even afford that? So the CFO really doesn't have the same exact requirements as a chief data officer and governance officer, because one focuses over access and visibility and making sure that you can look at that data. The other one really cares, okay, are we bleeding that we can have a going concern issue as an organization, because our capital requirements are not met, or our compliance risk, we may run into compliance issues, or do we have the right reserves that we're supposed to have in place? These are completely separate conversations that the data officer doesn't even, it's not really, they don't care as much as a CFO does.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't, they do. I know they do, but it's just different focus.
Yeah, 100%. Everybody has their own KPIs, and therefore are delivering against their KPIs, and therefore have a slightly different focus. I mean, you have been doing that for a while, Yandy. So maybe can you share a success story, right? An example where improving data reconciliation made a massive difference and deliver impact for a carrier. I mean, I remember reading something about one of your goals, which is, I think, tier 1 carrier capability accessible to every insurer, regardless of size. So how do you see maybe a medium-sized insurer achieving big carrier results by using smarter data tools like yours, and therefore achieving better reconciliation? So therefore driving more better results, but also decision-making within the organizations.
Yeah. So tangible results that we've seen is, I mean, we've helped carriers go from 2 to 3 weeks of month-end closing and reconciliation of financials down to 2 to 3 days. In fact, it's like 1 day, but they typically take a little longer just to be safe. But it's usually 2 to 3 days now, and that's kind of the common pattern. So when we come around, you're likely going to be in a situation where it's taking 10 days to close the books. We bring that down to 3.
Yeah.
Usually it's taking you 2 weeks. We'll bring that down significantly so that the teams that are currently doing this, they have more time actually to focus on quality instead of just collecting all the data and figuring it out later. So, and that's why it takes a lot of time, because they have to spend all this time collecting the data, and then they spend an insane amount of time reconciling the data. Whereas what we do is we provide them an infrastructure where all the reports are there for them, everything they need every single month, and it's all done within the day 1 of the month end. And then after that, then it's just reconciling. All the time is really spent on reconciling instead of collecting data. That's our number 1 goal, like our most valuable results that we've shown. The other thing is compliance requirements. For example, for workers' compensation is NCCI, which is the agency that provides rating for every single policy in most states. That process for reporting policies and reporting stats, very complex. We have that down. Takes no time. We created a proprietary process for that is tightly embedded with our intelligence ecosystem, that instead of taking weeks to generate the submission files, we create that in seconds for them. And those are tangible results that if you were to try to outsource it to your internal staff, eventually that person starts that job, but by the year 1 or year 2, they're fed up and they don't want to do that anymore because it's very time consuming. With the tools that they have at their disposal, we bring in modern stack that is usually common practice for fintech, for social media companies that have to handle really large sizes of data. We're set up for that. We're not set up with legacy tech, legacy data stack. We're set up with a modern data stack that is really fast processing, regardless of the size of your data.
I know we are talking about insurance, but the same process could apply to many other industries. So, Yandy, as a thought leader, who often emphasizes the focus on insight, not clean up, right? It's what you are saying. Let's use the time, effort, knowledge of the people within our team as best as possible. What advice would you give to insurance CFOs looking to transform their financial function?
Make sure you're the team that is putting together the requirements for the data warehouse and the data lakehouse. They have a strong financial background. It's gonna save you tons of time when that requirement being translated to the technical folks that have to do the implementation, and that's usually the gap. If you don't have that strong, solid foundation in the people that have to do this work, then you have gaps in information and requirements. And these gaps, at first they're missed, and then later they become much larger problems. So if you want to build your own intelligence ecosystem and intelligence layer, there is a component of everybody involved, including the technical folks, need to understand when somebody in the claim system pushes a button, what that's actually doing. Not just what the database shows, but what that actually does. And when they understand fundamentally how those core systems are affecting, like transacting the data and then reflecting in the database, and then they understand how that affects the financials, they get the full picture. The value on return of their output is going to be exponentially greater than the ones that are limited in scope of understanding.
So Yandy, you and I are going to make our way to ITC InsurTech Connect Las Vegas in October. So I look forward to seeing you there. If you have a few last words you would like to share with our listeners, our audience, what would that be? And, where can they find you if they want to reach out as well?
So I really want to empathize with everybody in accounting and finance departments that are every single first day of the month. It's exhausting. It's dreadful. It's overwhelming. Getting the reports to the board are extremely overwhelming, and they take a long time. It doesn't have to be that way. We've done it better. We've improved that process significantly. And even if you don't use our solution, I'm happy to share that with anybody for free. I'm happy to share that information because information is the way that everybody can grow and become better and help the organization in the best possible way. And you can always reach me by email or by going to my company website. That's datahaven.software. So www.datahaven.software. Reach out to me also via email. You can put that in the caption or in the description of wherever we post the video. But it's, or call me.
Also reach out on LinkedIn, which is a platform I like very much as well.
Definitely on LinkedIn. You can always hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always available. I'm pretty quick on there as well.
Well, Yandy, thank you very much for joining me today. It was very insightful. We don't often talk about the office of the Chief Finance Officer. And so I really wanted to highlight that, a department which also use data, a department which also need artificial intelligence, a department which actually makes decisions which are crucial decisions for any business to succeed. So thank you very much for joining me. And I hope we have a lot of the insurance companies, insurance CFOs who are going to listen to our conversation and hopefully give you a call as well. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm thrilled. Look forward to seeing you in ITC Vegas. And again, I'm just look forward. So I wanted to also add something here. I am entirely focused on, and I made it my entire goal for this company. We are not going to go into any other industry. We're only going to do this for insurance and 100% only insurance. Yes, the entire value chain, but only insurance. So I know this could be helpful for other companies, but I'm sorry, if you're not in insurance, I can't help you.
Sorry, only insurance. Wonderful.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Yandy, and I see you soon.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scouting for Growth. Please subscribe, share with friends, and leave a 5-star rating. Your rating is so valuable. I review all of them, and my team help me adapt content to meet your needs. Also, connect with me on my preferred channels. I am a B2B growth expert, so you will find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads, and X as well as Blue Sky. All information available below. Until next, keep scouting for growth.